I won't make any announcements because we just made them. And thank you so much, Jacqueline. And then we can jump right in. So anybody who has a question, if you're new, what you can do is there's a little chat button at the bottom. You can hover over it, click the chat, type your question in the chat, or send it to Jacqueline directly. And she uses a little software that's a plugin that randomly plugs out the questions, and then she sends them over to me. So this is the way to get your questions answered. I'll try to leave some time for live questions at the end. We keep like taking polls and asking people and getting feedback, and generally people prefer the typed questions. So I'll always spend a little more time doing the typed questions than the live questions. We'll always try to do like 2 or 3 at the end of the live. And I'm going to dive right in. So the first question I see here is from Kayla. Hello, Kayla. How are you? So Kayla says, hi, Thais. I hope you're doing well. Thank you. Your courses and webinars are so eye-opening and give me more ideas and tools and direction than ever before, but I'm struggling with the 3 points below. Number 1, there is so much I can identify that I need to work on, basically everything, and I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. Where would you recommend one should start? Okay, I'm just going to answer each question at a time here. This is a great question, and honestly, it's a great piece of feedback for us. Like, I can definitely see why people come in and feel overwhelmed, because like, I love creating content. I love teaching. And so, you know, I'm like always creating content based on what people need. And so what we're actually doing inside the platform right now is we're creating programs for people to target specific areas and giving exactly the courses to take, in what order, how much time to spend on each one. Some people already have it rolled out on their dashboard, and it's kind of rolling out in stages to people. But you'll see a lot of that with like how much time I recommend you spend. I created like videos for each start saying like, hey, here's your program, here's what I recommend, here's how to do it. But here's what I'm going to tell you right now to answer the question. So you'll see more of that. So it's like a little more user friendly from the user experience perspective. But when we're trying to heal, and there's a whole sort of like backstory to this, but like when I'm going to tell the backstory just really quick and try not to go on for too long, but how like a lot of like this attachment stuff came about is like I learned about traditional attachment theory in university. But I was first working with people a lot on their core wounds, their needs, their boundaries, and emotional regulation. And I was working with people, and then I knew about attachment theory, but then I took a course on it at one point and was like, oh my gosh, like these things that I see are like grouped almost perfectly into people's attachment styles. Like DAs tend to have like the emotions they experience more often around irritation, frustration, impatience, numbness. And they tend to feel core wounds around defectiveness and shame. And they tend to have needs for security and harmony and comfort. And anyway, so it was really interesting. And so that's where like a lot of this type of attachment theory that you're learning about, it's called integrated attachment theory, is coming from. And really at its core, even though it's put under the umbrella of an attachment style, really the attachment style is being used as a grouping to tell you, here's how to reprogram your limiting beliefs. Here's how to understand your needs and learn how to meet them. And here's how to like do some somatic processing work on your emotions and get in a relationship with your boundaries. If you do those 4 underlying things that have been grouped into what those things likely are, what the pain points likely are as the attachment style that you are. So APs will have certain core wounds, certain relationship to boundaries, certain types of emotions. DAs will have different ones. If you can get those 4 key parts, you're dealing with root cause. You're dealing with all the things that make up the insecure attachment style, all the programming that's creating an insecure output. And so those are the 4 areas you're really focusing on the most. And then everything else can follow. Then you can fine tune your communication. You can reprogram success, you know, limiting beliefs. There's all these other things you can do on top of that and kind of become more advanced and learn how to help others communicate and de-escalate. But if you can just get those 4 things, you're going to see massive transformation in your life. So what I really recommend is based on your attachment style. And again, you'll see it like laid out more effectively in order, but, you know, emotional mastery and belief reprogramming course is definitely a must do. The needs course. And then the somatic processing and nervous system regulation course, super, super important. and the boundaries course. And I would say like those are your starter kit for most attachment styles. And the shadow work course is also really helpful. I mean, there's lots of other cool things, but just start with that. And the other thing too is like, don't put pressure on yourself. Don't make this like I need to do it all at once. There's so many things I need to work on. Think of it as like if you're thinking it from a health perspective, like you might be like, oh my gosh, I'm learning so much about food. There's so many things I need to change about how I eat. There's so many types of exercises I can do at the gym. There's so many types of sports I could play, but it's like what you're just looking for is a routine that works for you, right? Like, and that's the same thing here. It's like, hey, like what I recommend is if you can get in like 30 minutes a day, 3 times a week, you're going to crush it because you're going to constantly have like input. And if you can complement that with like a little morning or evening routine for 15 minutes where you do a meditation or a reprogramming or a nervous system regulation tool or whatever it is that you're focusing on, you're going to see that just by like being present and involved in that and not worrying about the outcome or the timeline, but just instead being like, I'm going to show up for this, you're going to see that the needle really moves because you're dealing with root cause, you're reconditioning, which is the only way that real change takes place, in my opinion. So don't overwhelm yourself, just distill it into a habit that works for you. So really, really great question. Okay. So you said number 2, I use your, what need is unmet model whenever I feel discomfort now. And the need always seems to boil down to comfort. But I can't do this work while seeking comfort. How do I face challenging thoughts and not want to go to my bedroom inside a blanket and binge on Netflix? Okay. Amazing question. That's a really good place for the nervous system regulation course. When you are constantly feeling a need for comfort, it's usually a sign that your nervous system is dysregulated. And so it usually means that you're spending too much time throughout the course of your day in sympathetic nervous system mode. So like low level fight or flight. And so your desire to seek comfort is a subconscious strategy to like just get regulated again. So when instead you can be like, oh, here is my, you start doing the nervous system regulation course, you just put a habit together for that. You're going to see that it's easier to get into parasympathetic nervous system mode, which is rest and digest mode. And through there's a whole webinar in here too about polyvagal theory, Dr. Stephen Porges' work. But you don't even need to take it really at all. But if you're interested, it's extra, information about it. But the whole concept behind polyvagal theory is that we can actually activate which nervous system function we're in at will through habits. And so the nervous system regulation course gives you those habits. And by having an intentional habit, you'll be able to spend more time in parasympathetic nervous system mode. And when you're living life from that space, you don't need to seek comfort. You feel more safe. You feel more relaxed. When you need a little bit of like regulation, you can just go straight to your nervous system regulation habit, and comfort will fall way down. It used to be really high for me too. And it's like, it's not something that really shows up in my personality needs much anymore at all. And so you'll see it go down just because your program state is one of more comfort in how you're living life and like the nervous system mode you're living through. And parasympathetic nervous system mode, when we're in that mode, is rest and comfort mode. It's that sort of rested state. So that is the answer for that. And then you said, maybe like the 2 above, I seem to have a low tolerance for stress. Definitely linked to that. I laid out a 2-month hardcore work required strategy for my current problem and then felt dread about how stressful and taxing these 2 months will be, not because timelines are not generous enough, but because facing my fears and comforts are so daunting and stress inducing. Any tips here? Yeah. Again, nervous system regulation work will be a great first part. And then secondly, I would make a list of like what you feel or believe about your emotions. Like, because you've taken like self-work, which really is, more objectively a huge opportunity for growth, healing, working through things that were there in the past and having, more positive outcomes that are supportive to your life and what you want. Like, that's really what that is an offering for, right? But if you have a story about what it means, it's really scary. Then that's where the pain points are coming from. So what are you making doing the work mean? What's the meaning you're giving to that? And you might be like, I can't do it. I'll feel all these terrible feelings and never come out of them. I have to look at all the things in my past. And that's not true either, right? You don't really have to look at a whole lot in your past. You can make some links and connections, but it's really about realizing what beliefs are here in the present, what needs are unmet in the present, and reconditioning that. So The dread is not going to come from the situation, but the meaning you're giving to the situation. And by reprogramming that or questioning, poking holes in that using the emotional processing tool, you'll be able to let go of a lot of that fear and then feel more present in the experience itself. So really great questions. And yeah, thank you for sharing. Okay. The next question I see here is from Anonymous. Hello, Anonymous. How are you? So Anonymous says, hi, Thais. What a gem you are. Thank you. That's so sweet. During the bullying webinar, you mentioned self-care is an issue for victims of bullying, most especially physical self-care and self-love. Why is that? Is it protection related? Yes, it's that whatever we're exposed to externally through repetition over time imprints our subconscious mind. In other words, it gives us programming. And then whatever programming we have is starting to develop the relationship we have to ourselves. So if we get imprinted by a lot of ideas that we're not good enough, then that's going to become our own story about ourselves, right? That's going to become our own internal dialogue. The belief I have that I'm not good enough. If we, get a lot of neglect for our need for to be seen, then we're going to feel like, okay, well, I don't really know what being seen is, and I guess it doesn't matter. And I don't know how to give that to myself. And so my imprinting is to ignore myself because I get ignored, and to ignore my feelings because my feelings get ignored. So there's no programming to hold space for that, to normalize that, to model that to us. And so that becomes the relationship to ourselves. And so when you take that in the context of bullying, part of why self-care is an issue for victims of bullying is because you've got this self-care dynamic. You've got this, like, what's bullying giving to you? It's giving you a lot of like feeling unsafe, having to avoid or ignore yourself, or bullies teach you that you're not good enough, or you're not worthy, or you're not. And so then when these are our narratives, and then this is, what we repetitively get as our input, it becomes our comfort zone. It becomes like so much of the relationship we build to ourselves. And so it's very common that that adaptation to that is to ignore oneself, to put oneself down, to beat oneself up, right? And then to feel unsafe about the relationship to self. So a lot of it's more like, it is protection related at its core, because it's like, well, my subconscious comfort zone is about familiarity and safety. But that's like, so that's sort of like what's sponsoring it. But then we want to be able to go, okay, like, how do I move out of this going forward, right? How do I move beyond this as a general rule? And that starts from being able to go, okay, you know what? I'm going to give myself intentional habits and strategies to show up. I'm going to do some nervous system regulation. I'm going to work through core wounds and sort of move through things from there. So really, really beautiful question. And thank you for sharing. Okay. The next question I see here is from Holly. Hello, Holly. How are you? I know you were waiting for a question, so I'm glad that I get to answer your question. So Holly says, hi, Thais. Could you help me understand one's tendency towards comparison? Are there core wounds associated with an individual's tendency to compare oneself to others? What stories is comparison associated with, and what tools or exercises do you recommend to overcome comparing oneself to others? Thank you so much. Okay, beautiful question. So let's look at comparison for a second. So when you look at comparison, right, part of it, if it's a pattern, is going to be subconscious comfort zone based. Okay. So you know that there's going to be a part of it that's like, I have some kind of story I'm feeding back into because it's comfortable and familiar. So usually it's, I'm not good enough, things like that. But actually, believe it or not, comparison has a lot to do with the need for certainty and the need for, like, it's almost like strengthening self-identity in its own way. It's like when I'm comparing myself, I'm trying to figure out who I am and where I fit in, right? Which is what? Certainty. It's like, self-awareness and understanding of oneself. And so that's really what it's rooted in more than anything else. And so that's also going to be what you're trying to get through self-comparison. So what you want to look at is like, who am I comparing myself to, and in what area of life? And how can I develop a strong enough sense of self and identity in that area of life that I don't keep looking from the outside in? Okay. So let's say I'm comparing myself to Bob, my coworker. And let's say I'm like, oh, like Bob is like a better physician than I am, or, and I'm like thinking about it and feeling about it. And it's like, okay, well, what about just like focusing on like where I'm at? What do I want to improve on? What my goals are in my job specifically, and having a sense of certainty by making a plan, having structure and order and organization. So it's like, how can you take those needs and create healthier, updated strategies? And then also realize wherever I'm comparing myself, it's because I'm unsure of myself in some form. So developing that inner sense of self and identity and certainty about what I need, what I want, what my goals are, and those parameters around you will sort of help you from having to try to gather that information through a subconscious strategy from the outside in. So that's one for sure. So really rooted in needs more than anything else. But then you can also ask yourself, when I am comparing myself, what's usually the wound that's most activated that may be part of my subconscious comfort zone? Is it always coming back to me not being good enough? Is it me comparing myself to other people in relationships and me telling some story, I'm going to be alone, like, so looking for like, what is that wound that's connected there? And then reprogramming that wound as well will be a very, very powerful set of steps to take. And then having like in your back pocket, like a cognitive reframe from, or like a cognitive reframe around the patterns of where you compare yourself. Like, no, here's how I'm going to think about it instead when I catch myself going down that thought rabbit hole. That will be very powerful also. So really, really great question. And thank you for sharing. Okay. The next question I see here is from HH. Hello, HH. How are you? So HH says, hello, Thais. Grateful for your awesome work. Thank you so much. I remember a situation that happened between my ex-situationship and I. We were doing the 36 quiz to love questions together as a quality time activity. And one of the questions was along the lines of, what is one thing that happened in your life that feels too good to be true? Her instant answer without hesitation was, you, in quotes, pointing at me. Then immediately after, she was like, I'm joking. I personally don't find the phrase too good to be true as a bad connotation, like it's explained in general. Hence, I didn't take it personally when she said it, nor when she followed up with, I'm joking. For context, she is FA leaning heavy DA. I'm secure leaning a little bit AP. I'm interested in understanding what she was thinking when she thinks I'm too good to be true. So I think it's fair to be like, oh, like too good to be true is sort of like a phrase, right? But it feels like too good to be true kind of tends to infer like out of my league, or I'm not good enough for that thing, or I'm not worthy of that thing. And so, she might have said, it could be one of two things. She could have said that as like trying to be sweet, right? And then be like, haha, like sort of just being like playful or sweet. And, or it could be that like, that's definitely what she feels or was feeling, and then felt a little vulnerable about saying it. So it was like, oh, I'm joking. That's a bad phrase, and kind of like going into like, oh, I don't want to be that vulnerable to you kind of mode. But generally, I mean, the too good to be true means that I'm not worthy of, I'm not good enough for, this is out of my league, I don't deserve this, right? So it's usually going to be related to like those sorts of core wounds or deeper inferences or interpretations. And, FA leaning heavily DA would probably say that, feel that way, and then be like, oh, I don't want to share that actually. So I'm going to deflect now and say it was a joke. So I think that's sort of where it's coming from more than anything else. And hopefully that makes sense, and really great question. And thank you for sharing. Awesome. Okay. So the next one I see here is from Leona. Hi, Leona. How are you? So Leona says, hi, Thais. I've been under a lot of pressure recently, and I notice that I am pushing people away. I'm not sure why, but it doesn't feel good, as I need people in my life, but I don't have much bandwidth at the same time. Do you think this could be a subconscious way to seek something? Okay, this is a great question. Here is what I see. When you push people away, and Leona, I'm pretty sure I think you're FA, right? So, or we're FA at least. So, yes. Okay. Thanks. Sanjana knows. She's like, I'll confirm for you. I know everybody's attachment styles. That's awesome. So here's what usually happens. FAs, when it comes to a lot of their needs, believe that like a lot of FAs are kind of like, I meet everybody else's needs and then I meet my own needs. And And it comes from like, usually that's some of your upbringing or childhood. So it's a very common FA pattern to be like, um, you can get certain needs met from others, like emotional connection in certain forms, things like that. But when you're isolating, almost always it's trying to create space or time to meet a need that's really unmet. So when you say, do you think this is a subconscious way to seek something? Like, I think that's like hitting the nail on the head. And usually what happens is you have an unmet need that you're not consciously aware of. Your subconscious mind is trying to drive you towards that need. So it's pushing out people it thinks will not meet them, pushing out time or space that it thinks is not going to meet those. And it's trying to get that sense of like getting in touch with yourself to meet what that need is. And then if you don't know consciously what it is, you can feel like, why am I isolating? But it's actually your way of like trying to carve out that time to meet something that's unmet. And as a general rule, that's kind of technically like the avoidant experience to a certain degree as well. But there's just more of a greater disconnect from that. So with that being said, I think you're like absolutely on the right track. And I think that what I would do is I would actually retake the personality needs questions, because sometimes we change and we shift, right? And I would put a strong emphasis and focus on like, what are the needs that like I would meet in relationship to myself? And then try to really fill up those buckets in the relationship to yourself. Like, I actually wouldn't change spending less time around people immediately. I would try to like spend time focusing on what that need is, because by focusing on that need, meeting it in relationship to self, now you've like recharged more effectively, your bandwidth increases, and then you can go take that out into the world and into your relationships with others and communicate it or share it, or just go out into the world feeling recharged. So that's how I would do it in steps, and find out like, what is the need? How can I get meeting myself? And then also communicating it and receiving it from others. So it's a nice balanced way all along that continuum of interdependency of like self and other. So really, really great question, and very insightful question as well. Okay, the next question I see here is from Tyra. Hello, Tyra. How are you? When I was a little kid, Tyra, just so you know, this is really off topic. When I used to play Barbies when I was a little girl, I used to name my Barbies Tyra. I always liked that name. Anyways, okay. So Tyra says, hi, Thais. I really like these courses and I have learned so much. I have been on a healing journey for so long, and I feel like I've been alone at this and not having anyone to practice this with. My question is, how do I get through this stage of, oh, it just jumped. Hold on. How do I get through the stage of being alone in life right now, because no one around me is working on this and discouraging me? Okay. Amazing question. So Tyra, I think you're new, or at least I haven't seen you ask a question, because I would have definitely remembered your name. Part of like why we have all these like community things in PDS is because when I was kind of creating the idea for PDS, it was like, that's what I felt once too. It was like, oh my gosh, I'm working on this, I'm doing this inner work. And like, how do you talk to people about this stuff when you're going through it? And it's so nice to be like, oh, like you're going through the same thing. So, I mean, the first thing I'm going to encourage you to do is join the community. We have like these post-webinar chats and post-webinar hangouts. We've got daily community events like communication scripts practice. If you want to practice communicating, we've got like deep connection questions and self-love routines and reprogramming exercises. Like, we've got all these different things. So you can literally go into like the webinar calendar, the social event calendar, and see tons of space where you can connect with people who are like-minded online, right? And doing the same things. And yes, I know it's not in person, but like sometimes the depth of connection outweighs like the proximity, because it's like people really sharing and people sort of going through similar things and being on that same page. So I would definitely say like maximize those resources. They're all like free with the membership. They all come with the membership. So go in there, take advantage of those first and foremost for sure. And second of all, I would say, as you are doing this work, come up with intentional strategies to meet people like this in your area. Like, if proximity really matters to you a lot, which is fair, right? Like that you want to talk to somebody about this in person too. See what like personal growth meetups are in your area. See what events or workshops or like, talks or anything is in your area, and try to like go to those things and connect with people and be intentional about building those friendships and relationships. And I think doing that is going to be super important. And the last thing I would say too is like, if there's a bit of a wound around being alone, I would do a little bit of core wound reprogramming on being alone, right? Is it being alone? It may also be like the need for emotional connection. And don't be afraid to initiate in the relationships you do have. Like, hey, I'm going through this kind of like big personal growth journey right now, and I'm learning a lot about myself, and I want to share those things sometimes. And, in the close relationships too, you asking people to hold space for that and to be open to that. And the more you do that over time, the more you'll see like, hey, the people who are meant to be in your life and relating to that part will open space for that, and we'll talk to you and listen and be present, and you can ask them questions too, and they can share feedback. And if not, by being intentional about where you're spending your time, how you're investing your time. So much of connection is about people being in alignment with our personality needs, right? So sometimes when people feel alone and yet they've got people around, it's actually more representative of like, you've got a bunch of people around that you feel like are not meeting your personality needs. So if you have a huge personality need for personal growth or emotional connection or things like that, and then you're going, okay, like I don't have a lot of people filling this cup, sometimes you'll feel lonely even though you're around people. So that's like, important feedback to be like, how can I find more people like this? How can I connect to more people like this and fill these cups intentionally? And that will really help for that sense of fulfillment as a whole as well. So really, really great question. Okay, the next question I see here is B for boundaries. Hello, B for boundaries. How are you? So B for boundaries says, I always think I want to do 10 different things that would help me progress in my career and personal growth, but I end up only doing 1 or 2 things. I almost have accepted this even in my thoughts. Sometimes I catch myself thinking I'll wake up at 5 a.m. tomorrow, and at the same time have the feeling of knowing it's not going to happen. How do I fix this? Amazing question. B for boundaries. I think you were FA, right? And so here's what can happen, right? Sometimes we have this huge need, right? So the need can be for personal growth. Let's just say in this example, or achievement can be another big one as well. And so you might be like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. But sometimes there's also the need to be like a human, right? To like sleep, to feel rested. Maybe you've got a personality need for health. And you're like, hey, sleep's really important to me. So I'm going to sleep till 7 instead of 5, So maybe for comfort. So, to be honest, when you're going, I want to do 10 different things that will help me progress in career and personal growth. I actually think of that as like an overwhelm problem, less than a why am I not doing the 10 different things problem. And as a general rule, when we try to put so many things on our plate, we end up self-sabotaging because there's too many things to keep track of. There's too many things going on at once. And so what I recommend doing is actually picking 1 or 2 things we want to improve at a time, and then making it a habit. And what I mean by habit is making it a new normal so that eventually it becomes subconscious. Okay. And once it's subconscious, now you can take on new things. And let's say, for example, okay, so I'll give you an example. So when I first started meditating, I was like, oh, like meditation, like I'm never going to want to do this every day. But then I was like, you know what? Meditation is really helping me like witness my thoughts, regulate my nervous system, be in touch with like what my emotions are. Like it's a great tool for me. And so rather than saying I'm going to meditate and I'm going to journal and I'm going to do all these different things, I'm going to just like focus on getting that normalized into my habits for now. And then I can take on the next thing. And so I would practice meditating and making sure I was consistent and showed up until that was just something that was a normal part of my everyday life. And then there's room to focus on a new habit. And I don't have to think about, am I going to meditate in the morning? Am I going to meditate in the evening? I don't have to consciously think about it or plan for it. I just know that I start my day for 10 minutes doing that. And when I finish my day, that's what I do when I'm sitting in bed, right? Like I get into bed and that's part of my evening routine. Like I know that, my husband knows that, that's just like how it is. So when we can, rather than saying you should be doing these 10 things, I would actually say, pick 1 or 2 things at a time, make them a system, and then take on your next 2 things. And all of a sudden you'll have all these things that you do that you don't have to think about and that aren't this extra added effort. And then you'll feel like, oh, I'm actually structuring my life in this way. And to be honest, whether it's like changing your eating habits or having an exercise routine or meditation or journal or whatever it is, if we try to do them all at once, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I feel overwhelmed by all these things I'm trying to do. And that overwhelm now your subconscious mind associates these things you're trying to do with the feeling of overwhelm. And guess what your mind wants to do? Your mind is wired to avoid negative feelings, right? So your mind associates these good things with bad feelings, and then your feelings are the ones making the decision at the tipping point. Neuroscience has proven this. So now you've got this, like, until we can get rid of the overwhelm and be like, oh, I got this. This is a system. It feels good. I see the benefits. I feel the benefits. I don't even think about it. Now let me take on my next one or two things. You probably know something's not going to happen because you know that you feel overwhelmed about it, and that's going to drive your decision at its core. So that's generally a big part of what's happening. So really, really great question, and thank you for sharing. Okay. The next question I see here is Unicorn Jockey. Hello, Unicorn Jockey. Nice to see you. How are you? I know you've been waiting to ask a question as well. So Unicorn Jockey says, hi, Thais. Thanks to you, I'm becoming more secure. And thanks to your hard work. But I find that many of my previous friendships with my lovely DA friends aren't as rewarding for me as before. Is this normal, or is there something else going on? I also find that I do 95% of the reaching out to my friends, and when I initiate, they'll join for the activities I organize most of the time, though considerably less now that I've moved an hour away. However, they don't initiate, they don't invite me over, and I feel like I'm the one keeping the friendships going. If I don't reach out to them, I won't hear from them for months. I know I need to express my needs and see them through, and I'm working on that. I'd love some feedback on how I'm contributing to this dynamic and how to avoid it in the future so I can have more balanced friendships. I'd also love to know how to let them know my needs in a DA whispery way, as most of them are DAs. Thanks for all that you do. Unicorn Jockey, you always make me laugh. Okay, so first thing, is it normal that more of your DA friendships are not as rewarding now that you've become more secure? Yes. I don't want to say that that's, I know that's not necessarily like the best news to hear, but generally what happens is you start opening up. Like, a lot of DAs get along really well because they tend to have really similar needs, right? But a lot of those needs have to be like survival oriented needs, like comfort, security. I mean, learning is one that's not necessarily survival oriented, but a lot of DAs are like in that space. And then a lot of their feelings aren't online with each other, right? A lot of the interactions tend to be more security or comfort based or intellectually based, which is an element of self, but doesn't like necessarily take into account like many elements of self, the richness of the holistic part of ourselves. And it is very common that when DAs start to become more secure, that suddenly it's like, oh, I want to talk about like human behavior and patterns and ask personal questions and have deeper conversations and know things more about, stuff about people and what they're feeling. And I want to say like, hey, how's your life? How's work going? And what are you really feeling about work? And sometimes before, DAs will, in a lot of friendships, what I've seen a lot of the time is DAs will kind of connect with each other over something else. So DAs will go play pool together and talk about pool. DAs will go, sit and watch a movie together and talk about the movie. DAs will watch a show together, talk about the show. And then sometimes when you start becoming more secure, you kind of like deepen your connection to self, which gives you so much more depth of connection available to others. And suddenly those things are like, hey, that feels kind of surfacey now. That feels kind of like unfulfilling. And I want more from my friendships. I want to understand more and know more and talk about deeper things. And it won't be like a huge thing. Like, there will still be needs for learning. There will still be, it'll be fun to do an activity together with friends as well. But I've seen very commonly that as a DA becomes more secure and gets a lot more into relationship to themselves, suddenly some of these dynamics can be a little bit less rewarding because they're lacking some of the need for like deeper connection, more depth, and more like understanding of each other's inner worlds, which is an important part of a relationship. So with all of that being said, I would do a couple things. Like, you definitely nailed it when you were like, I need to express my needs and see them through. I mean, that's going to be a huge part of it, is like speaking up, saying, hey, let's say you have a group of friends. Let's say there's 5 friends. Maybe you say, hey, why don't we all plan an activity each month or each week or bi-weekly, and sort of like delegate it out. And it doesn't have to be this like, hey, I need you to start X, Y, Z in this pressuring way. It can be like, hey guys, why don't we all like take a turn and and, make a plan, like something fun we can look forward to. And everybody take a turn each, bi-weekly or whatever it might be. You can create like a strategy like that that just is like clear, specific. You make it fun. Like we'll do a fun activity. We'll do something enjoyable. And that would be like your DA whispery way of sort of communicating that, where the pressure's off, it's fun, it's something to look forward to, and it's really specific and just delegated out. That's pretty low hanging fruit for people to participate in. And then when somebody forgets, be like, hey, it's your week. Like, are you going to plan it? It's a really easy way of seeing things through. So you can definitely do something like that. But the other thing I would say too is like, when you look at your lovely DA friends, in your words, you say your friendships with your lovely DA friends aren't as rewarding as before. Get really specific. Like for you personally, what is less rewarding? Is it the lack of emotional connection? Is it the lack of validation, of investment, of consistency? Like, what are those things? And then what are some strategies to meet new people that will supply those things more, right? And it doesn't mean get rid of your friends at all. It means like have a really special place for those individuals and like care for them and how they're showing up and what they're available for. And sometimes it's like the best to have a DA friend who, you can just go hang out with and like watch a movie with and not have to talk so much when you're tired, or, like there can be, or somebody who's just like really grounding and like secure, or a time you really want to have a great intellectual debate, like, but what I understand is that as you start to develop more of yourself and you're used to relating with just a part of yourself to these individuals, now there's like this extra part of the self that you've sort of developed as you become more secure that needs feeding from your friendships, right? And so it's like, where can I be intentional? I can still bring those things into friendships, try to open those types of dialogue with my friendships. But I can also go out and have intentional strategies for how I would meet new people that will feed into that, and put that into my time, put that into my weekend plans, put my energy into those areas so that that part of myself gets fed in that connection with others as well. So really great question. And thank you for sharing. Okay. The next question I see here is from Julia. Hello, Julia. I know you've been waiting for a question too. This is great. I feel like we're getting all the people whose hands have been raised, and like I'm getting a chance to connect to your guys' questions. So I'm so happy. Okay, so Julia says, hey, Thais, how would I communicate to a parent who is extremely sensitive to abandonment that I want to stay in Europe? I've been living in Europe for 5 years now, 5+ years now, sorry. I'm coming to the end of my second program here. I had a very strong reaction from my parent when I told them I wanted to continue studying in Europe after my first program. Now I'm worried about the reaction I will get, as this is essentially indefinite. I want to be true to myself and not hurt them. Thank you. Okay, amazing question. So I love, Julia, that you're able to like first know truly what you want, right? And then you're like, how do I communicate this in a healthy way, right? You're preparing yourself for a parent that's sensitive to those things. So the first thing I would say is that it's going to be super important to do a few key things. Number one, validate their feelings. Number two, have a way of equilibrating their pain points ahead of time. It's just going to make it so much easier. And then also explaining your feelings, your needs, and having boundaries around it. Okay, so I know that was a lot, but I'll take you through the steps in more detail. So the first thing would be, let's say, I'm just going to guess or pretend that it's your mother, okay? So let's say I'm you, and I'm going to call my mom and say, I've been in Europe and I really want to stay here potentially permanently. So I would start and be like, hey, I really want to chat with you about something. It's been on my mind and I've been really concerned about it hurting your feelings in any way. And let's say, ahead of time, the core wound is like abandonment or disconnection, right? So what's the opposite? So I can prepare to equilibrate that ahead of time. It's connection, it's closeness. And so I would say, I spent some time thinking, and I really see myself staying here. I don't know for exactly how long, but I definitely see myself trying to like set up and establish my life here. And of course, one of my concerns is like being disconnected from you, but I had some great ideas. We can set up weekly phone calls. We can do a weekly Skype session. We can plan a trip to see each other, once a year, or we'll have like some kind of staggered plan for when we will see each other. And I want you to know that this is because of many needs in my life that being here meets, and you can list a few. And you can put boundaries around it, so you say, I'm not really looking to change my mind about this as of now. I've spent a lot of time reflecting, but I really want to care for our relationship at the same time. So here's some great ideas. We'll do the Skype calls. We'll do the phone calls. We'll have dinner together over Skype sometimes. And when you create like a structure, strategies, and you speak into the opposite of that person's core wounds, to show that there will be connection, there will be closeness, and maybe more emotional closeness and vulnerability over the phone rather than physical closeness. But I mean, isn't that what we're really looking for with a parent-child relationship at the end of the day anyways? I mean, of course, parents can be still very affectionate with their kids and, give them hugs and hold their hand or whatever it might be. But I mean, most of the adult life relationships are like going to be based off of deep emotional connection. We talk about stuff, we share things, we stay in touch. There's a consistency to it. There's an openness to it. And that's what's really going to move the needle longer term. So you can bring up all those things by equilibrating those core wounds ahead of time. Obviously, it's super helpful to do. And really, really great question overall. So good luck, and let me know how it goes, and keep us posted for sure. Okay. The next question I see here is Carolyn. Hello, Carolyn. How are you? Nice to see you. I'm glad I get to go to your question too. So Carolyn says, it's been my experience that people don't like it when you set boundaries. So in the past, I haven't, because I didn't want people to feel like a pariah or like a pariah. I have no idea what that word is, quite honestly. Pariah. I don't know if it's a typo or a word. Pariah. I didn't want people to feel like a person who's rejected or an outcast. Okay, it's a real word. Thank you. You just taught me something. Or be rejected. But now I'm a boundary master. I set boundaries with managers, my friends, everybody. I feel better about myself. But people don't like me, and I don't have many friends. Even when I speak up before things build up, my observation is that people simply don't like people who have boundaries. I don't want people trampling over me, but I don't want to be left out either. What do I do? Okay, amazing question. So we can have boundaries, but still make compromises, right? And it kind of boils down to this idea of the difference between a compromise and a sacrifice. So a compromise would be something like Bob says, hey, come out for dinner. And maybe I'm having a long work week, and maybe I'm like, whoa, I need time to myself for a minute first. And so maybe Bob says, come out for dinner, be there at 7. And I'm like, Bob, you know what? I would love to see you and spend time with you for dinner. I'm really needing some time to myself. I can either come an hour late because I'm going to need an hour to myself. So we can either do it at 8, or I'm happy to go for lunch on Sunday afternoon, right? So you can still, it doesn't have to be that you are doing or setting boundaries and it's kind of becoming this like one-sided thing where you only allow your needs to be heard, your needs to be met. You can still make compromises, but that's a healthy thing, right? You've taken yourself into consideration when making a choice. Sacrifices are like our boundaryless moments, right? So if you said, in the past, you didn't want to be rejected, so you would be boundaryless. And so it's like, in that case, it's like Bob's like, hey, come out for dinner. And I'm like exhausted. And I'm like, I really don't feel like going out for dinner, but I'm like, oh, I'm too afraid to reject Bob. I'm just going to go. And then I go and I'm tired and I'm grumpy. And then I've got plans all day Saturday and I just never got time to myself. And now I'm back in my work week on Monday and I'm like, right. So assuming time to yourself is a need, right? So you can see the difference between like total lack of consideration to self versus balancing my consideration of self with consideration of what people need from me, and finding like a healthy medium. It doesn't always have to be saying yes to stuff, and it doesn't have to be always saying no to stuff, but a lot of the time it's kind of somewhere in between. It's like, I can't do that, but here's what I can do, kind of thing. And that really helps to keep that balance and that harmony across relationships. So fantastic question and really, really great share. Okay. The next question I see here is from Mika. Hello, Mika. How are you? So Mika says, hi, Thais. How important do you think it is that in a romantic relationship, your significant other admire and appreciate the things in you that you yourself value? I get turned off when dating someone who seems overly focused on physical attraction. By the end of the second date, if they compliment my looks and yet they've said nothing about my intellect or character, I get turned off and have to talk myself out of deactivating. I know I have stories to work on here. But from a values or needs perspective, I want them to care about the things in me that I care about. Okay, I love this question. So here's the thing, right? You may be getting turned off by the trait that you judge that as. Okay, so you might be going, oh, I see that as being superficial, or it could be the need that it might take away from. So you could go, oh, I could see that would take away from my need for emotional connection, or to be seen or understood, or to have intellectual connection, or so it could be that that's like triggering you, and then you go into deactivating because you're a little bit triggered, even if it's like low level, right? But you have to wonder too, right? Like, so let's say you tell the story that, oh, this person talks about my physical attraction or physical appearance, and that means they're not available for intellectual connection. That means that they won't see or care about my character. So you tell a story, but let's poke a hole in it, right? So what's our first hole that we try to poke? Well, could it be something other than this? And, a lot of times, like, I think when people are nervous, I mean, where do we get it's pretty sad, but like, where do we get most of our modeling for healthy relationships? Like television, right? Like, it's not like from like a counselor or a therapist or, healthy dynamics. I mean, sure, you can get like, if you have healthy parent dynamics, but I mean, most people don't necessarily have that. So, most of our modeling comes from like television or movies and stuff, which, to be honest, gives like a lot of not healthy messaging about relationships, in my opinion. Like, I'm not sure that that's a great source. It gives you it's so funny because it's like, it really gives us these ideas that like, you see a lot of like almost like narcissism in movies. Like, people do these grandiose gestures after these big fights, or you see people like violating boundaries of each other, or people having these crazy expectations of each other and they read each other's minds. Like, you don't get like healthy communication modeled to you in movies. Anyways, so with all of that being said, a lot of modeling and concepts and ideas for relationships come from these sorts of dynamics, right? They come from like these sorts of perspectives. So you may have somebody who's just going on a date and they're nervous because it's normal to be nervous, and they think it's just the status quo to be like, oh, you look beautiful. And maybe they don't have a love language on words of affirmation. Maybe they're still getting to know you and they don't feel like they know enough about your character just yet. They may admire your intellect internally and just not think to say it out loud, because that's not, nor you don't see in like the movies that somebody's like, oh, wow, I just admire like the way you hold yourself in a conversation, right? That's not like, I've never seen that in a movie. So there could be other things other than that, right? And so what I would say, and so much of like moving through deactivation is practicing communicating before we deactivate. So what I would say is like, if you catch yourself saying that, letting somebody know that how you value a relationship has a lot to do with like intellect and character and depth, and that's important to you, and to know that that's what somebody's looking for in a relationship, to open a dialogue about that, to ask somebody what's important to them in relationships beyond physical appearance, and then get that information before making that assumption in the story and then deactivating. So you can have lots of strategies there, but I would say, like, if you see yourself doing that, question the story, give them the information they need, and ask the questions you need to get the information, and let them know like what you're looking for and what's important to you, and see how they respond once they have that information on the table. And that can help you not move from a place of deactivating, but from a place of choosing what's right for you. If somebody's like, yeah, I don't care about intellect and character, I'm glad you brought that up and we get that out of the way. I mean, then you walk away from the date and you're like, that's not the right match. But if somebody's like, yeah, like, I'm glad you share that with me. Like, really connecting intellectually and having people who have like strong moral character is really important to me too. And like, here's why, and here's some ideas, and here are the topics I love to intellectually talk about and debate about. What about you? And it opens up all this stuff. Like, that can be a huge turn of events that you might not have even known was there by just making that judgment and deactivating, right? And going into that kind of self-protection mode. So it's a great opportunity to communicate needs and show up there and move through that accordingly. So great question. And thank you for sharing. Okay. The next question I see here is from Nay. Hello, Nay. How are you? So Nay says, hi, Thais. And waves. So last year I separated from a DA who was also my best friend. I left because he was afraid to commit and thought I could do better than him no matter how much I tried to convince him otherwise. Now, it was previously a heavy FA, but I'm now leaning much more secure. But the issue is that I honestly do still miss him. And I saw him this week when he came to my family's house to surprise my younger brother for his birthday. Afterwards, we chatted a bit and agreed to go get coffee this next week to catch up more. And truthfully, Thais, I am terrified because although I am more secure now, I am so afraid I'll fall into my FA patterns and try to mind read or feel rejection quickly. Or if things go slightly left, I feel I will deactivate hard like I've done in the past. And I just don't want to do that again. I just want it to be a nice, friendly meeting, but I don't know how to not let my emotions get in the way. Is there anything you would recommend I do to prep for a meeting? Thanks so much. Yes. Amazing question. So, you know, what I hear here, right, is like something was left, it didn't work, it wasn't working, and maybe it was kind of like an attachment style dynamic at the time, and now you're kind of like, okay, I maybe have more information, maybe you feel like your hopes could be up, maybe you feel like there's still this kind of connection there, and so there's a lot that you can do. The first thing I would do is I would make a list of what my expectations are and I would question them. Because if you're like having this, and the way you'll be able to see your expectations are like, hey, what's in my secret fantasy? So if you're like sitting here imagining that you're going to go into the coffee and you guys are going to confess your love to each other that's been there this whole time and get back together the next day, like, you know, like what are the thoughts you've been having? What are those little like secret fantasies that you've been thinking about and feeding into, and that'll tell you a little bit about your expectations. And then you want to ground those expectations, right? So you want them to be you want to be able to go, okay, I'm having this fantasy, but that's telling me these like sort of subconscious expectations I'm carrying, but what's healthy? Like, that's telling me that I have a need to maybe reconnect. So what's a healthy version of that? Well, I would only want to reconnect if we're not going to repeat those same patterns. And I would have to treat this again like it's sort of the dating stage of a relationship and vetting, and like really know that these things are not going to pop back up again, right? That he's worked through things, he's willing to take accountability, these sorts of dynamics, right? So first of all, it'd be like, what are my expectations? Let me ground them into like what this tells me about my needs instead. And then let me find a healthy way of making space for these needs without self-abandonment or self-betrayal. And so that may look like, you know, I'll take my time to sort of date and talk again. Maybe I'll take the time to feel out if it's just going to be a friendship. And you can actually spend some time in sort of step 2 there, evaluating what your needs really are. Like, what do I need from this? What am I hoping the outcome will be? What would I like to see happen? And then, you know, when you do that, you would have to be like, and how can I get these needs met in the healthiest way possible? And that will give you the direction as to, like, if he's sitting there and you can see he's repeating those same patterns or he's been in that same place, then you might be like, okay, well, I can see that even though there may be some feelings, it's better off as a friendship right now, because I see that he's still, you know, thinks that he's not good enough and he still feels like he's incapable of trying in a relationship or fully committing. And I can hear based on the way he's talking about relationships right now. So you really want to go in knowing your needs, but having boundaries around them, and being intentional with like how you communicate and what kind of questions you ask. I would also say that it's important to not rush into anything, even if there's been a really long-standing relationship there. It's important to see, like, where is this going? Like, is it a friendship? And you probably won't know after one time getting coffee, right? Like, since you said this used to be your best friend before you dated, both of you are probably going to kind of feel out, are we just reconnecting as friends, or is there a romantic thing there? And it may take the first like 3 or 4 times of just hanging out to really get a feel for where you stand. So give yourself that time, go in with low expectations in terms of like how fast I should know for sure and he should know for sure. I think both of you will kind of be doing that dance a little bit to sort of figure it out. And I would say like what you can know for sure is that if it goes smoothly and you connect and you have a good time, to know that a healthy output is like, hey, let's grab coffee again next week, or to, you know, to plan to continue to rebuild the connection. And as you sort of see where it's going, you can decide what you're really looking for and what you're really hoping about. And then, you know, by sort of time spent together, number 4, number 5, then you can really bring up that conversation. Maybe number 3, if you're just really heading it off. And if it was a really intense relationship before, you could say, hey, you know, I'm happy to reconnect as friends, but I also do have some feelings here and would love to see, like, is this going to move in a direction that's beyond just friends? And, you know, I just want to put that on the table. Like, you know, if we were to do that, like, you know, I've learned a lot, and, you know, I'm not sure if you've been through any growth or learning, but, you know, I think we could do stuff differently this time around, and we can move really slowly, but here are my ideas or suggestions. And I want us to talk about what didn't work and what we could do better next time, so we don't have to run into that problem again. So you can always open up that dialogue, but wait first, feel it out first. You may have a really clear answer after hanging out twice. But spend some time, see how it's going. And if both of you are kind of flirting a lot or moving in that direction or insinuating those things, or you can feel that kind of chemistry there, then bring it up, but bring it up intentionally as well, from the perspective of like, hey, you know, what do we do now? How can we not go back into repeat patterns? What do we need to work on as people? And then, you know, if you come home, I would just say every time you spend, do an emotional processing sheet after you spend time together. So you can work through like any stories that come up or any unmet needs that you have, or anything of that sort. And it will just keep you grounded throughout that process and really clear and intentional. And the very last tip I'll give you, sorry, I know this is many tips, but the very last thing I would say is it's also very valuable to be like, what are my personal boundaries and standards for relationships right now? Like, what do I want in a relationship? What are my standards? What are my non-negotiables in relationships? And if you know what those are, when you're kind of reconnecting, you can kind of vet that and you can sort of feel it out and see, like, is this person available for those things? Are they not available for those things? Where are they at? And then by really clearly understanding, that will also give you the information you need to take the next steps. It's a really great question. And I'll do some live questions now. So I think we'll hopefully be able to get through 3. I think we got through a lot of people's questions with their hands raised, but in the typed version. So I'm going to pick people that didn't. So Asma, if you want to go ahead. I know you were waiting from a couple weeks back.
Thank you so much.
Hi.
Hi. So today is going to be about friendship. So this last week, so I had an exchange with a relatively new girlfriend here. I've known her for 3 months, and I knew she had like maybe COVID, and also her family, they tested negative, and the doctor said like with this new latest like virus, like they see a lot of negative tests, but it's probably COVID. And she was flying back to Canada with her family, and they were still sick. So I get triggered. I think it's like the end safety. And when she told me, I wasn't seeing her that last, and I know she's very considerate, because the last time I had seen her, she was wearing a mask, knowing that her kids were sick. So, and we were keeping distance. But when she told me that she was going to fly the following day, and they were still all moderately sick and probably COVID, I think I got triggered. That was the unsafety thing. So I took some time to actually understand why I was so triggered by that. And I was able to, so I dig deep, and I know it comes from my brother, who would always, when he would make a mistake, he would put me in front, and I was the one beaten up by my dad. So it's like, it brought up all of those memories. So I was able to work through that. But I knew I wanted to say something to her, but I felt it wasn't really my place. But at the same time, I knew that I was gonna pull away if I didn't say anything.
Okay.
I
Wow.
felt that I was pulling away. I was already so I tried to sandwich that, but I think I wasn't very good at sandwiching it. So so I told her because well she ended up canceling her flight because she knew that Canada government was gonna send them back. So I said, well that sucks, but really I was going to actually text you that I think it's a mistake. I know she's like her mother is narcissistic too, so I know she has probably like all FA that respect themselves. We all have I'm bad forward. So I tried to actually just say I think it's like it would be exposing other people and I think it's like it would have been a mistake. I'm sure that you're gonna find a silver lining. I tried, but I'm not sure I did a good work, but I was very proud of myself. It didn't work. She sent me a long email, long text saying that the only reason she didn't know that like she thinks that it's just flu now and like are we calling it pandemic? I didn't want to enter. I know that a lot of people have different opinions, so I wanted to respect the different opinion, but at the same time like expressing because I knew that if I had kept it inside I would have pulled away. I know myself. And after the long explanation she said I don't think we're the best match as friends. So I felt that I'm always worried about what I have to say around you. I'm like what? And like I know that I've been very mindful about expressing my needs but in a very respectful way. And I felt blindsided like
Yeah.
but I know it's like the kind of thing that I used to do. But yes I did feel blindsided. So I'm just wondering, of course I respected her decision and I think like my hormone of I'm rejected also I didn't really enter into argumentation. I said okay, I had no idea you felt that way. I wish I knew. We all have blind spots and maybe I'm not aware of. But anyways, of course, I respect your decision, and that's it. I probably have my maybe the forward I'm rejected. So like I didn't, yeah. Like for me, it's like that's it. There's no. So I just wonder what would have been the best way to communicate what like because it's very tricky now with COVID. We all have different opinions, but yeah,
Wow.
what would have been the best way?
Wow. Okay, so I want to just acknowledge you to start off with, which is like you knew what came up, you took the time to work through it, you took the time to be like, okay, I noticed, I love that when you said, oh, I noticed if I didn't say something, I was going to pull away. Um, and so, you kind of get into a space where it's like if I decide not to say something, it's sort of like self-betrayal
Yeah.
type territory. And then, it's unfortunate she responded back, and we could talk about how like maybe that person's not ready for the quality of friendship you're looking for. However, the one place I would try to pull things apart would be like, it sort of goes back to this idea. It's like when we want to change things about, and I'm not, here to say like she should have flown, she shouldn't have flown, like,
Yeah.
who knows what she has or what's going on. But just in terms of like, sometimes when we want to change the world, so like something on our external world, it's because we want to change how that's making us feel internally. And so, I wonder if from that sort of standpoint, if it's like, was there anything you could have said internally first? Like, could you have said like, hey, and it's hard because if it's like a really big moral thing for you, it may just still enter into self-betrayal. And it's like you either like you might have just come to that path and that's it. You only had like, I ignore and pretend like it doesn't bother me and suppress my feelings, or I don't. And so then in that case, you did the only thing that you could do. And if that's her response, then that goes into the compatibility territory and friendship. But if it's the one place I would just double check in first would be like, okay, is there anything I could have said from my perspective? Like hey, I hope you have a safe flight. I was a little worried, that you're jumping on the airplane, and like I'm personally nervous about COVID at this time. And if you ever feel sick, please let me know in advance. Like, so, maybe it's like because does your mind go, well, geez, she's doing that. How could I trust her with keeping my health, safe or protected? Or maybe your mind goes, how could I trust her as a person, right? Like maybe, so there might be those roots. And either there's going to be something you find that you can communicate about and set a boundary and get released. Like if you may have said, okay, well, I hope you have a safe travel, but hey, do me a favor. Like if you're going to come around and you're symptomatic, like I'm being really mindful of my health right now, and I would appreciate if you could respect that. And then maybe you're like, okay, at least I know she validated, she sees me, she hears me, she says, yep, I got you, like cool. And you're like, okay, that feels resolved. Or maybe it still doesn't, because maybe you're like, ooh, that's a warning flag for me as a person. And so it depends on like where you're at with that. And if it was still just, there's not a way around that wouldn't affect me, I have to talk about that thing and bring that up from like a moral perspective or philosophical perspective or whatever it might be for you, then you only did what you could that was right. And then it becomes just not giving that meaning that you're rejected in her response. It just means working on your story, because it's like, hey, I did everything to show up for myself. That was my truth. And if she's going to not be able to participate in the friendship back, maybe she's not ready to have a friendship where we talk through stuff and we have honest conversations and we work through things. But if you're like, you know what, I think if I just set a boundary around my health or my concern and she respected it, then I would have been fine. Then that would have been your place of work going into next time. But I get the sense that it was
the other one, because I'm very I've been good at setting boundaries, and she knows my boundaries around health, and she's been very considerate. But I was just wondering, if she were secure, like how would she have reacted? Because I knew it was a little bit tricky. I know it was touchy. So it's like, how would you have reacted? Yeah.
And the answer is not like that. Okay. Right? The answer is, if she were secure, it probably would have been like, hey, like let's pretend that like you haven't seen her in person. Let's pretend she literally just has a cold and she tested negative or whatever, right? And let's pretend you made a huge mistake, you're way off. Which, like, even at the end of the day, how you communicated, like you didn't do anything wrong, even if it was just a cold or whatever. But let's just pretend, like, as your worst case scenario, right? That it's just a cold, she's taken 6 COVID tests and she's totally negative. And then a secure person, even if you made an assumption that was incorrect, would have gone like, hey, I appreciate where you're coming from, and I can understand like that matters to you. Being courteous of other people matters to you, and I respect that. But also, like, you're missing some information. I'm definitely negative for COVID, and I would appreciate if you could just ask me, a little more detail next time before making an assumption. Like, it would have been a worked through dialogue. It would never have been our friendship's not a match, we're not compatible. Like, that was, hi, I'm a person with some big core wounds around being controlled or judged as bad, and I'm rebelling against my core wounds that are just happening to spill onto you, rather than rebelling against you and the objective dynamic of what's taking place. So for sure, a reflection of attachment style. And to be honest, like, I think through the stages of communication, taking yourself into consideration, having the boundaries, knowing how to show up, like, I think you've done a great job. So I think it's just, as much as she's like, you're not a match for me, maybe she's just not ready for the quality of relationship to work through misunderstandings, which will happen between people at times, especially during like charged times in the world. Like, these things are going to happen, and we either get good at talking through them or we don't. And it's like, hey, what types of friendships do you want to have around? So so that's my answer.
Thank you. That's really, thank you so much.
Thank you. And amazing work and great communication and checking in and knowing I was going to pull away. And, I think you're doing fantastic. So thank you for sharing. Awesome. Okay. Shayna, if you would like to go ahead, I know you've had your hand up waiting as well.
Yay. Thank you so much. I'm glad to have a chance to answer my question. And I'm also looking really forward to the training coming up next week.
I know I forget to announce it sometimes, but I'm so excited for it too. For everybody who's coming and joining, I've really looking forward to it, and really excited that you're going to be there. That's fantastic.
Me too. Okay, so I'm going to try to go quickly through my questions so you can get the next one. So this is about my friendship situation, and just to kind of refresh your memory, probably remember most of it, but I had asked.
I remember exactly where you left off. You left off being like, I reached out again. I had already been clear. We set I said to her, like, hey, can we make this plan? She agreed to the plan. And then she still didn't follow through. And we were like, hey, it's not fair to you at this point to keep investing. It becomes kind of self-abandonment and self-betrayal.
Yes, exactly. So that was what happened. And then, so you had suggested, yeah, and you suggested reaching out at Light Matter. She didn't respond to that. You advised stop making an effort. So I did that. I followed the advice. I made no further
And then
effort
she
at all.
reached out.
Yes.
As the FA would.
Yes. Also, I wanted to say, like, there was a couple little things that felt a bit uncomfortable for me in that something that when we had this conversation, something that was bothering me of why I provoked me to have the conversation is because she was leaving messages unacknowledged for like 3-week periods of time. And I want to say I was too, but I think for different reasons. And, but it was, because I have like experienced like ghosting before. And so I would go to like thinking that that's what's going on. And so in the conversation, I had asked her, can we have an agreement that if either of us decides we're going to stop participating, that we would let the person know, you know? And so I felt a little bit uncomfortable with like making no effort to be in touch without offering any kind of explanation, and also kind of acting distant without explanation was kind of like could be perceived as me being like upset and being passive or something. And so what happened is after 8 weeks passed, she sent me a message. She sent me a message sharing that she's visiting her family overseas, and she shared a bunch of pictures, which is, and I wanted to say that that is really, really uncharacteristic of her and very unusual behavior for her to share pictures and share information about. She's very generally really private. I describe her as being kind of guarded. On occasions when I've invited her to share pictures, she's declined that, you know. And so I see this as unusual behavior. And I've also seen this appear at another time, like in a different cycle when there was this kind of like activating, deactivating thing. And so I'm questioning, can that be maybe an activating strategy to kind of regain connection? And so what I did is I replied with a brief response. I validated her experience. I expressed appreciation, but I didn't share anything much about myself. Well, I didn't share anything at all about myself. I just left it at that. And then since then, I've made no further effort to be in touch because I haven't really known, like, I need the guidance now. I don't know how to proceed. But now having information that, for one, that she's been traveling overseas and she's away from home and that she's with her family, and realizing also the timing of the conversation happened around like the end of the semester when she's really like overwhelmed with everything and that she's maybe preparing to go on this trip. Like I'm thinking, and also noticing like she was happy to agree. Like she didn't seem reluctant or hesitant to agree to that when I asked if she'd be open to schedule the monthly phone call. And just made me wonder if maybe she actually did just genuinely forget. And so I'm worried now because I'm worried that if I be in touch with her and try to make an effort to be in touch and send a message, now it's been like, I don't know, going on 3 months that I haven't been in touch. And so I'm worried that what I'm going to experience is coldness from her in the form of like formality and delayed responding, because I've seen this whole cycle like do this before when we were very regularly connecting and I got upset about something and then I deactivated. I didn't wasn't in touch for like weeks and just had very minimal contact. And then she kind of came forward with, she started to sign her name. Like she had always like signed her name as a teacher. Then she like for a year, she left her messages unsigned. And then she started signing her name with a K, which is like the first letter of her name. So that was like very unusual. And then I still didn't like come back because I was struggling with stuff and trying to figure out how to communicate. And then she made another effort like to do something that was very uncharacteristic, where she like sent a video of the garden at her house and was talking on the video, and she doesn't like.
Guys are just in like an anxious avoidant trap is what's
Yeah.
happening. Like you're like the FA friendship that pinballs back and forth.
When I came back, then she was like, she didn't answer my messages for a long time, and then she began signing her name with the name she uses professionally, like consistently, like every time. And so I felt like I hurt her feelings because she maybe stepped out of her comfort zone to like do something she doesn't normally do, and to try to regain connection. That didn't work, and now maybe she got hurt, and
So,
this, so I'm worried if I reach out now, I'm going to get upset and coldness, or distance.
so
And so, how do I reach out? What do I do?
this is exactly what I would say. If it were a romantic relationship, we would say it's not working, right? We'd be like, okay, like your needs aren't getting met. It's causing more pain and harm than good. A friendship's a little bit different because we can have very strong variations of friendship. Generally, with a romantic relationship, like you're not going to go months without talking to somebody and still be together. And, so there's sort of these different dynamics.
Mhm.
To me, the only way I see this working is if you have very low expectations, but can still remain friends. So let's say like this. Here's what I think. This is a very typical FA dynamic, okay, especially in friendships. FAs have a subconscious comfort zone around being there for people during really chaotic, really hard times. She was really there for you during really chaotic, really hard times. Then FAs generally feel like when they're not in that chaos, their subconscious comfort zone is suddenly like, ooh, things are normal. The person doesn't really need me or to rely on me. So, I guess, they sort of distance away from it from when things are normal because they don't feel needed or like they have to show up or there's not that sense of familiarity. So you'll generally see them really show up, then kind of fall off a little bit. And then they guilt and shame themselves. Like, oh no, they're mad at me. They're going to be upset with me. And then they get afraid to reach out because they're like preemptively guilting and shaming themselves and assuming receiving guilt and shame. And so then they often just like fall off and they kind of like ice out. And like you just see that in her, like, and I'm sure that's what's happening with her, like every step of the way. And then you're more on the slightly anxious side, even though you have that avoidant part there too with deactivating sometimes, but you get more afraid of like feeling rejected or being hurt. So you'll kind of walk on eggshells a little bit. And you guys have this like kind of like anxious avoidant trap happening, just both pinballing back and forth. So the only way this works, I mean, I don't think that because you're sitting here doing the work and showing up and communicating healthily and doing all this stuff, but she's not, right? Like she's not taking courses, learning about her dynamics. So she's probably going to stay this way. So I don't see her being like really great at turning around. Like if she's got this inconsistency dynamic in her emotional bandwidth and the relationship to herself, that's going to directly impact. Like when fearful avoidants specifically have their emotional bandwidth shrunken, the first place they pull away from is friendships as a general rule. That's a very FA thing. Mm-hmm. And so what you're probably seeing is exactly that. And it's like, unless she's doing deep inner work to expand her emotional bandwidth or to prioritize her time or, whatever it might be, then you may not see that shift. And so my thing is like, okay, through the ringer with her and being like on a roller coaster of like hopeful letdown, or a little like a step forward, 2 steps back, a step forward, 2 steps back. Instead, I would be like, can you have a friendship with her that's more distant, where you maybe just chat every so often, you sort of see her as she goes, maybe you aim for once a month, but maybe it ends up being more like once about every other month. She doesn't commit to like specific needs for consistency, but you know that when she is there, that you'll be able to stay in touch. Can you have that, or will that feel like being friends with an ex who you still have feelings for, kind of thing? Like, I know it's not romantic at all, but will that be like, gosh, you just always want more of that friendship because it was such a great friendship at one point, and it just kind of leaves you feeling empty-handed all the time?
I think what you said secondly is the truth for me, because we spent so much time together in school, and because we were so connected, and that I feel like there'll always be like a wishing like that things would be consistent, and actually like things have been so confusing, but in times they have been consistent. Like when I stopped working with her as a teacher, I told her, this is too confusing playing dual roles, I get too confused, I'm going to hire a different teacher. And I expressed to her, I said, the only kind of relationship, I can't go back to having a teacher relationship only. So I'm only interested in having a social type of relationship. Are you open to that? And she began to come to my house every week, and she would have lunch with me after school, like weekly. And then COVID happened, and I feel like COVID, like, interrupted that, momentum that was kind of developing of having consistent connection. And then, but during COVID, she was in touch with me every week, and her and I exchanged messages weekly. But she participated close to equally as much as I did, and took as much initiative as I was taking about maybe like 60-40 or something. So she was also showing effort and being in touch and being connected and stuff. So I don't know, to answer that question though, I feel like I'm always going to feel
Yeah.
like sad.
I just think you're wanting something from somebody who's not available for it. And I don't think that from her end, it's showing signs of changing. Like, I just think from her end, it's like the same thing. Like, she's available, not available. Like, it could be that she's available when she has some more emotional bandwidth, but then she's totally unavailable other times. And I just see that same pattern of like, you're doing the work, you're changing how you communicate, you're showing up, you're doing all these things. But it's like being with a romantic partner who just can't give you what you're needing. And it's like, you can do all the work in the world, but if they're not meeting you partway at least a little bit, you're going to keep feeling like that longing, that wishing, that hoping. And there may be little good moments of it where like, you know, oh, there's a breakthrough for a week or two or for a couple of months, but then the person drops off again. And because there's such an inner depth to that for you, especially because she was there for you at a time of need, I really think it's going to be like like hoping for the same outcome, or what's that, the definition? And I'm not saying in any way that you're insane or anything like that.
Right.
I mean, we've all been there, but it's that definition of insane. Like, yeah, I forget the quote, but it's like doing the same thing, hoping for a different outcome. And it's like, at some point you just have to be like, you know what? I have to matter more. Like, I have to not put myself through that. The person's not available, not meeting my needs, not showing up. And if anything, if she starts really trying to reconnect, at some point, like reaching out weekly, all these things, you could maybe decide to start responding again. But at that point, I would actually say, hey, look, let's have a conversation, like almost like a breakup. Like, hey, if my ex is trying to come back and get back together, I better sit down and go, what are we going to do differently this time if I'm even going to open my mind to thinking about this, right? Like, how would it be different this time around? And I think you're beyond that point. I think it's like, she's not doing the inner work, so you can basically guarantee that the same output's going to keep happening. And then it just becomes an injustice to you. It becomes like unfair. It becomes like you're putting yourself in harm's way a little bit to keep going through the emotional ringer.
I was just wondering, would it be appropriate to like kind of have a boundary, like to express that, like, I really love spending time with you, I miss that, and you know, let's have an honest conversation about where you're at with that. And if you really don't want to spend time together, then maybe the thing that I need to do is say goodbye, and maybe put you in a whole different position in my life, like where maybe I talk with you once a year or something. But can I set a boundary, and like, I need like this minimal amount of connection, and if that's not something you're available for, then let's put that on the table.
You could do that, but I just want to make sure you're not repeating, right? Where you like, oh, let me try this. Okay, this doesn't work. Let me try this. This doesn't work. So I would say, like, if this is it, that's the last resort, and you go in with the intention where it's kind of like a closure conversation rather than I mean, there's a chance she's like, you know what? I definitely want to maintain the friendship. I can definitely do exactly that thing.
How do you say that then? How do you express a boundary of minimal, like?
It's hard because it's like, I'm assuming it's basically going to be over text, right?
Yeah.
It's so tough. I think you're beyond that, quite honestly, but I would say, like, if you need that for closure, this is how I would say it, because I think the relationship's a little different from your end than from hers. I think she's got a funnier emotional bandwidth. I think she kind of imprinted on you during a time of need. So there's like this deeper connection there for you than for her a little bit, quite honestly. So I would say it from that perspective, really only. I'd be like, hey, I know that we talk about the friendship a lot. And I think it's because there was this part where you were really there for me for a time of need. So this friendship really lands maybe a little bit differently for me than for you. And it's really hard for me when we don't have certainty or we don't have some kind of consistency. And, you know, I know we've talked about this, and I've decided this is sort of the last time I can have this discussion with you. And it's for me to say, I really want to maintain the friendship. You mean a lot to me. But I keep feeling I'm kind of on this roller coaster from my end. And, you know, I'd like to see that we can truly follow through with communicating once a month or once a week or whatever your boundary is, right? But if not, I think it's better for me and healthier for me at this point to park this and just have the expectation that we'll maybe touch base once a year, and just sort of wish you the best in the meantime for what the friendship was. And I would really appreciate a response from you that's clear, because I need to be able to like put a sense of closure around this friendship one way or the other, like get a sense of certainty one way or the other. And so I would really explain like where you're coming from, exactly what you're looking for. A clear response is part of that. And then that way you can park it. And I would manage my internal expectations, basically assuming that it's not going to be anything other than this. And honestly, Shayna, that's like your last Hail Mary. Like, but I, if it were me personally, I would move on right now. Like I can tell you, because I know that that's what you're like really hoping, and you may need that for your sense of closure. But I would just be afraid that like at this point, even if she's like, yes, once a month, that like you're probably just going to get let down again. Like, because she's not doing the inner work to change, and she's not available for anything more than that. So if you go into that and you decide to take that path, that's okay if that's what you need for that last sort of sense of closure. But I would definitely manage my internal relationship to it, to assume that that's a risk I take on the boundary side, even if she says yes, and to assume that the most likely output is going to be, yes, let's touch base once a year and have a more distant relationship.
Okay. Yeah, I was going for the word closure is the word that kept coming up for me too. Like I want some level of certainty. I want to know what this is.
I would
like, and I want to put closure to it and just feel like it's done.
Yeah. And I would just, to be honest, I would just go for closure. Like, I mean, and again, I respect like where you're at and where you may need to just leave that out there one last time to totally walk away, guilt and regret free. Know you tried and did everything. I get that, but I really would make this the absolute last time. And, I would just be afraid that like, hey, you've been through this once or twice already. And she may just be like, yes, I will be better. I will. And then it doesn't happen. And then you're back in square one again.
As part of the boundary, could there be a warning that like, if I continue to see no follow through, then I'll know that I'm just warning you now that if I continue to see no follow through and you say you're going to do it and you don't, then
I know
you will know why I'm not in touch anymore then.
That's great. I love that. That's on the money. I think that's perfect. And then that gives you the closure either way. And then that also gives you the sense of like, if it doesn't happen, I don't have to feel let down again and then find closure. That's the closure I'm needing anyways. I love that. I think that's the perfect approach.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And keep us posted. And hey, I love that we worked through that together. I love that you were like, wait, but this and this, and you came up with that end one. So thank you for considering yourself and like really being attuned to exactly what you're needing in the situation, and wonderful share. So great work.
Teaching me well. And I will look forward to learning more with you next week.
Me too. Thank you. Awesome. Okay, Narosha, I know you were waiting. Wait, did I answer your question yesterday? No. I think I saw you. Your face came online when we were talking about your question in the comments. Is what happened. Hi.
Yeah. Hi. So how much time do I have?
I would say like I was gonna try to do one more, but we can keep it for next week. I would say like 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay. So okay, if I go over, you can we can continue it later. Also, if I go over your time limit, so I'm gonna start. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So emotional connection and understanding are my top relationship needs. So this is a situation where my sister's boundary and my needs are in conflict. She's 10 years older than me. I'm 32, by the way. So she was an authoritarian mother figure to me growing up. I was visiting her family in California with my parents this past Christmas. I was there for over a month. I have a need for freedom, novelty, family, and social connection. I feel trapped. I also tend to feel trapped and get bored easily. So I love my sister's family and spending time with my nephews. However, during the visit, I started feeling very trapped inside the house because of a lack of experiences with people of my age group outside of the house. Also, I have a personal tradition to do something fun with friends on New Year's Eve. I like to stick to this tradition every year because it truly makes my inner child happy, and it's something I look forward to all year. So I told my sister and dad that evening on New Year's Eve that I'll be out late with friends and that I'll be taking an Uber back so they don't have to worry about me. They kept insisting it's not safe to take an Uber back that late and that they will be picking me up. I stuck to my resolve and left. I had a great time with friends. I felt so free and almost felt like I got my sense of self back. When I was busy in the midst of a conversation with my friends around 2 a.m., my sister and dad started texting me and calling me incessantly, asking me when I'll be home. I felt like such a boundary violation because I had stated earlier that I'll be taking an Uber back whenever I got done. They kept texting me saying things like I was being, can you
Oh
still
yeah, yeah, I
hear
can hear
me?
you.
Just want to make sure. Yeah, so they kept, they texted me saying that I was being a bad Christian role model to my little nephews at home, who were not even awake at the time. So it was a very hurtful comment for me. I felt misunderstood, trapped, and controlled. I felt like my own family didn't let me express my authentic self and didn't understand the needs I was craving to get met for so long. A friend dropped me back. Anyway, so fast forward to now. I'm in California again at my sister's place. Before I came here, my California sister asked my other sister, who's 12 years older, to convey this message to me that she's not trying to control me, but that she has certain expectations of me while I'm at her house, because she only wants her kids around good Christian role models. And so basically, I can't do anything. I can't do things like staying out late. So first of all, this New Year's was the only one time I stayed out till 3 a.m. and the only ever time I went out of her house to socialize when visiting her. Every time I'm here, I'm home practically in lockdown, spending all of my time with my nephews. I feel like I spend all this money and time to come visit her, and I find it so unfair that I was not allowed to stay out this one night and do my own thing, and meet my friends, and see my friends who live in California. So I'm really upset and angry. I feel like my boundaries needs are being infringed on. Is this a reason? I keep wondering if this is a reasonable thing for her to expect of a guest. Sounds more like a controlling dating relationship. So from a very young age, I grew up hiding authentic parts of me so I could be this good religious girl. I no longer identify with a religion, by the way. The thing that upsets me is that my own sister, can't accept these authentic parts of me. She's changed and grown over the years, but her expressing this expectation now has really triggered me. The major core wound this is touching is I'm not understood, I'm not accepted for who I am, and that I'm having to perform and be something that I'm not in order to come across as this Christian role model. It feels like my sister has such an inauthentic expectation of me. So for me to feel authentically connected to someone, it's very important that they accept my fun social parts. I can't stay in an Airbnb or a hotel while I'm visiting her because I can't afford it. So like when I stay at someone's house, if someone's visiting me as a guest and paying for it, I wouldn't cross their boundaries and tell them to come home a certain time. It feels almost like a human rights violation. So how to express my need to her so we can have an authentic relationship? And I was also wondering if the boundary she's setting for me, is it reasonable? It feels like both our boundaries are in conflict, like whose boundaries win here?
Yeah. Okay. So amazing question. And thank you for sharing. So it's interesting, right? I mean, to be honest, like at its core, I think there's a couple things. So I'll break it into parts. The first thing is like you go out for New Year's, it's like your thing, you plan it. I could understand if she's like, I have to get up at 4 a.m. for work, or and you're allowed coming home and you make a mess and you ring the doorbell a bunch. I could understand if there was some kind of thing where it's like really affecting her or, something like that. But I don't like that there's the part where she turns around and guilt trips you, right? Oh, my kids have to see like somebody who's not out late. Meanwhile, they're sleeping, right? There's a sense of manipulation there, right? I'm trying to guilt you into paying attention to my needs over yours. It is interesting, like the house guest thing. I mean, it's kind of this gray area because it's like, I mean, it's hard to say exactly, depending on sort of a number of different things. I think at the end of the day, your approach would just be this. It would be step one, go communicate directly to her. Be like, hey, I want to let you know that I have these needs over here and I don't get to come to California often. I invest the money to come in here or to come out here and I'm spending my time, and I need you to make space for me as well, because if it's just all about me doing everything you need me to do the entire time and just obeying, then I don't feel like I'm taken into consideration. I feel like I come here and I have to fit into this mold and you don't see and hear and understand me. And that will have an effect on our relationship because it's not a two-way street. And I think at its core, that's the real issue, right? It's like, hey, like you don't get to feel like you're seen and heard and considered. There isn't space being made for you. And so you have to carve out that space and have that dialogue. And if she says no, absolutely not, or nope, sorry, too bad, that's where it's really the boundary violation. It's like you've communicated, you've spoken up, you've shared your truth, and now there's only space being made for her and no space being made for you. This is where we have a big imbalance, right? And so then my next thing would be, can I go stay with my friends? Like if I'm going to go out there, do I stay with her next time for 3 nights in a short period of time so I can say hi to my family, but not stay in like an oppressive space? And then when I want to see friends, just stay with them. And if I have to crash on their couch or something, you know, for a night or two, like, is that worth me doing? Does that feel comfortable for me? And sort of consider that. But I think the most important thing first is to have an honest dialogue, to share your perspective and your opinion about what it feels like for you on your end, and that you feel like there's this lack of acceptance. And you can say, look, I understand that you have a certain, set of elements or principles that you want to, live by or expose your children to, but I also have mine. And I think that both of us, for us to have a healthy, functional relationship, need to consider one another. And, I go to my way to consider you and to really show up and to do my best. And I need a little bit of room for myself to exist as well. And if she's going, no, absolutely not, it's a hard no. Personally, I would be like, okay, well then if there's no room for me to exist as a human in your space, I would be then, changing my expectations about the relationship a little bit. And I don't mean like, goodbye, sister, forever. I mean, like, maybe I don't go out there as often. Maybe I don't stay as long. Maybe I don't try to invest in that relationship as, on as deep of a level. And I kind of reorganize to have a bit of a more surface level, because at the end of the day, if only you see her and make compromises for her and then there's none back, then it becomes a really one-sided relationship. It kind of almost becomes like a bit of its own narcissistic relationship in a sense. I'm not saying she's a narcissist, but just that it's all about that person. There's no room for the other person at all, and their feelings, their needs to be empathized with, and it may be morally justified from her societal or religious perspective, but at the end of the day, like, it's still one human not seeing another human. We can say, oh, it's because you have the values I don't want my kids to be around, but it's like, really? Like, is it that? Like, at the end of the day, it's your family not allowing you to just go have a nice time with your friends. And so it's not like you're coming home, like giving the children drugs, like, and not to make a bad joke, but just, it's like, hey, like, there's just no space being made for you, and it's being justified through this thing, but it's kind of its own injustice. So, I think ultimately we want to feel seen and heard and connected and have that be a two-way street. So I would have the direct conversation, really sharing specifically what you're needing, specifically what your emotional experience is from your perspective, and asking for space for that when you do invest the money to come out there and come visit. And if she's like, no, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to go stay with my friends. I'll go out there for shorter periods of time. And when I want to see friends, I'll stay there. And if that's a no for you too, or that can't work for any number of logistical reasons, then I would maybe go out less often and maybe try to have more of a conversation or relationship over the phone, or in a way that is you considering yourself in that process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that totally does make sense. I think, and she considers me like in all other ways, like she'll cook for me, she'll do all of these things. So that's why I think guilty. Like, I just want to go out, see my friends, maybe, I don't know. So that was definitely validating what you told me. So when I plug it into the communication script, so when this happens, I interpret it as what? I'm just trying to come up with
I would start by like invalidating any core ones. I'd be like, look, I really appreciate how you cook for me and you like look out for me, and I understand that it's your home and I definitely respect that. But I come here and I'm kind of on my best behavior. I'm super mindful of the kids, and I'm also investing a lot of my money to come out here. And, while being here, it's really important for me to like go have a good time with friends and to have fun and to sort of be carefree. And, I can understand that you have certain things that you want your family to be exposed to, and you may have the struggle of having to give your kids a curfew in the next few years, and I get it. But I feel really like, my experience is that I'm sort of unseen. And this part of me that I want you to see all of me and know as my sister all of me, and make space for that. I feel like that part of me that just wants to have fun or let loose a little bit is kind of like rejected or denied. And it's uncomfortable for me. And so, what I'm really needing is for you to either make a little bit of space for that. If you can't, and you're like, no, I'm so worried about my children, then I can always go stay with my friends. But I would like to at least know that you don't reject that part of me, that it's more about you and your concerns and your fears and about a judgment of me. So to kind of approach it from that perspective. And then, to come up with really good boundaries and to say, like, ideally you make a compromise where, like, at least 1 or 2 nights when I invest all this money to come out here, you're cool with me, like, coming home. I'll come back quietly. We can make compromises. I'll try to not wake the kids, but if you're not able to do that, I could at least use some understanding. And I think you said your biggest need from relationships is our emotional connection and understanding.
Yes.
So at least I could use, the ability to know that you understand where I'm coming from. And I think that's going to be half of it, at least for you. If she's like, look, I totally get it. I'm terrified of waking my kids. I really want them to be, I'm going to have to give them curfews in the next few years. And I don't want them to be like, well, why did you let your aunts come home late? Or, and I'm just concerned about that as a parent, or whatever it is. Maybe she just has really deep inner fears. Maybe she's afraid of feeling out of control, whatever it might be. But at least if it's about her stuff rather than a judgment of you, and you feel understood and seen, then that will probably alleviate a lot of it. And then maybe you can just go stay with your friends on their couch for a night or two at the end of each trip, or things like that. But yeah, that would definitely be the approach that I would take overall.
Thank you so much. You articulated that so well. I mean, because at the end of the day, it's really, I really want to see I want her to see all parts of me. I think that's what it comes down to. It's like, I just feel rejected. It's not really, I don't care about meeting friends and all that, but it's just, I don't want to feel, I feel rejected by her. And that's
your sister,
really what
and
it comes down to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I know you have a younger sister, so I feel like you could relate
I understand.
to it.
Yeah. And that at least I know everybody has different relationships with their family, but for me, my sister's like one of the most important people in my life ever. So I know that would hurt if I was on, your end of it as well. And so I feel for you. And I think that will be a nice conversation to have. So
thank you so much, Ty.
Thank you. And amazing work, and amazing, detail and attention to detail, and being organized with everything, and always nice to chat with you.
Thank you, Ty.
Thank you. Okay. So, hello to everybody. Hello, Saeed. I hope I'm saying that properly. And Sai, nice to see you, and Boren and Sarah and iPhone. I think, I'm not sure who iPhone is, but I'm going to keep my eyes up for you guys going into next week if you have any questions. I'm sorry I couldn't get to everybody today. And thank you to everybody who also, shared their questions in the chat and came from a place of vulnerability and support to each other, and opened up in the questions I asked you guys in the previous webinar. So now